Like all mass, the apple is simultaneously accumulating and distributing its accumulation of energy. It is both charging and discharging. The interruption of the apple's fall to the Earth's center and the subsequent reversal of the charge within the mass of the disintegrating apple does not alter the opposite directions of motion, either for the charge or for the discharge. The accumulated electric potential continues spirally north by way of east in the electric stream to the planet's center, and the disintegration emanations continue south by way of west in the magnetic stream of the Earth's ecliptic. The bound energy being released by the disintegrating apple exchanges its power time preponderance for speed time preponderance. The balancing opposite of greater power time is within the planet. Consider familiar effects of gravitation and apply that observation to others less readily understood. The apple falls to the ground. The gas rises into the air. The planet floats in space. The apple and the gas are potentials out of place. When released, one falls, the other rises. One gravitates and the other radiates toward the pressure zones of their respective accumulations of potential, and they pass each other going in opposite directions. A planet is potential in place for the moment, but it is constantly moving radially toward the position of its ever-changing, lowering potential. The planet therefore floats in space in a defined, though changing orbit, appropriate to its own changing potential. For simplicity's sake, consider all mass as constantly falling. Consider the rising gas as falling toward the lower pressure, which has sufficient generative strength to attract and hold a mass of that particular density. Consider the planet as ever falling towards a pressure which is in equilibrium with its changing potential. For purposes of analogy, consider the effects of a stone dropped into the depths of the ocean. The stone, being potential out of place, falls toward the gravitative center of the mass of which it is a part until it arrives at a place where the opposing pressures are in equilibrium. It then does exactly as the planet does. It floats. After oscillating up and down for a bit above and below its proper pressure zone, it finds its orbit and also revolves around the generative center of its system, just as a planet revolves around its generative center. Also, it rotates upon an axis, the North Pole, of which dips toward the north magnetic pole of the Earth, and its equator is practically in a plane cutting the Earth's center. And so also do all the objects of the ocean's bed, if the water is of sufficient depth, fall up to the respective position for their respective potentials. Furthermore, their revolutions and rotations conform to those of the planet itself. And so also do they find their respective orbits and begin to revolve in them from west toward east and rotate upon defined axis also from west to east. Imagine some giant hand picking up this planet and removing it far away relatively from the pressure zone of the orbit of its potential, as the stone heretofore was removed before being dropped into the water. If suddenly it were released from out beyond Neptune's orbit, what would happen? Assuming that it held itself together and did not explode in so low a pressure zone, it would fall with increasing swiftness toward the sun in a line ever slightly curving northeasterly until it reached the orbit from which it had been removed. Arriving at the plane of its former orbit, it would sink below it toward the sun with decelerating speed, then after oscillating above and below for a time to lose its impetus and to find the inertial equilibrium position of its potential, it would eventually proceed in approximately the same orbit as before. It would have been somewhat damaged by expansion and surface ionization. its potential would be slightly lowered as a consequence of its adventure in lower pressure zones, and therefore its orbit would be slightly farther from the Sun than before its removal. Once more, imagine the giant hand picking up the planet and removing it in the opposite direction, toward the Sun instead of away from it. If suddenly released within Mercury's orbit, for example, what would happen? For the purpose of analogy, let us forget the fact that its low density in comparison to that of Mercury would cause its surface to become white hot and its oceans to disappear in a tenuous vapor. It would fall away from the Sun, curving southeasterly toward its orbital plane of pressure at an ever-decreasing speed, exactly as an atom of gas would rise from the Earth and fall at an ever-decreasing speed in an ever-curving southeasterly line toward its proper plane of pressure. The dimensions of this planet would not permit it to remain in Mercury's pressure zone any more than the density of a wooden ball would allow the ball to remain underwater in the pressure suitable to a stone. It would approximately find its former orbit. But because of the increased potential absorbed during its adventure in higher pressure zones, its orbit would be slightly nearer to the Sun than before its removal. This universe of motion is one of equilibrium, from the beginning of motion to maximum motion, during which progression, stability exchanges its reality for an illusion of stability. There is a true position for every potential. The true position must be found for the exact dimensions of the universal constant of energy which is stored up as mass. The desire of mass to find the position appropriate to its changing potential is the cause of all motion of mass. All mass seeking the true position for its changing potential displaces other mass which is also seeking the true position for its changing potential. All mass displaced must be replaced by its exact equal and opposite. The present theory that the moon would fall to the earth if it were not sustained by its motion is a mistaken one. The moon is not sustained in its position because of its motion, but because of its potential which demands its own equilibrium pressure. The earth and the moon push each other away by their preponderance of expansion pressure with greater violence than they pull each other together by their contraction pressure. The moon is assisting in the replacement of displaced energy and is ever on its way toward inertia, following its spirally curving path through such eons of time that its successive orbits appear exactly equal in dimension. If the moon were detained in one position for a time, it would race to the place where normally it would have been had it not been detained. Just so with the planets. The Earth would not fall into the Sun if motion ceased any more than a balloon would drop to the earth or a cork sink in water. The hydrogen expelled from the Sun cannot drop back to the Sun. The expansion pressures of the Sun's radioactivity will not permit it. The expulsion of the planets by the Sun and the impossibility of their return is based on the same principle. The difference is only one of relative potential. Mass in motion cannot cease its motion. Mass is an unstable condition which cannot remain unchanged for 1 second. Instability cannot become stabilized. The motions of the planets and their satellites are not continuations of an original impetus, nor are they continued because of the non-resistance of the ether. They are revolving in their orbits and rotating upon their axis because they are floating in the flowing streams and whirling vortices of their own particular waves of energy accumulation. They cannot do otherwise than follow the direction of the pressures from behind and the suction from in front. They are ever seeking a place of rest and never finding it, so long as they are burdened with the form of